Ostschweiz im Gespräch. Guten Abend und herzlich willkommen.
Eastern Switzerland in conversation. Good evening and welcome. Last March, Patrick Lutz ended his 23-year-old drugs career. He decided to go for the most radical of all solutions. He went to Moscow for therapy. Tonight he is our guest. Good evening, Patrick. Hello. Why this extreme decision? Why take on such a major challenge, stay clean or die? It was just by chance that I heard about this therapy in Moscow. My ex-wife had seen a little notice in a newspaper. I then contacted Nicole Gear and met her. I saw how she lived and how she was. It was the way she radiated a real love of life that completely fascinated me. But I still needed a whole year before I definitely decided that I would go to Moscow, come hell or high water. I'll either end up there or I'll come back home a healthy man. Right, but what happens now? You've been on heroin for 23 years. You're off it now. But if you were to go on it again, you'd die. How long will this last? Another month or two, or for the rest of your life? No, it'll last for a long time, at least according to Dr. Zobin. It takes as long as the period of the addiction till healthy receptors have grown back and the brain is regenerated and you can safely start using again. With me, it happens to be 23 years, which means there's a long way for me to go in this condition. Lots of people keep talking about this risk of death. Hey, you'll snuff it if you take anything. But the fact is that this craving for opiates has just been wiped out in me. I mean, that whole craving and need for opiates is just gone. And so this whole thing about death doesn't worry me. You've already been through quite a few withdrawals and therapies. You've even been clean for a year or two. This time you've lasted half a year. Aren't you afraid that this craving that you're not feeling now, that it just might come back again? All of the Swiss patients who've had themselves treated in Moscow, like Nicole for example, she did it 6 years ago, her husband Ninad 10 years ago, and they're still around, just like they were on that first day in Moscow. No, I'm not at all worried. The Zobin method is a form of therapy that's very controversial amongst local experts. Some of them believe that what happens to people there is nothing more than jiggery-pokery. I have tried to explain to any number of people what happens to you there, but you can only feel it if you're the one lying on that table, and let me tell you, it's got nothing to do with jiggery-pokery. When I was still in Moscow, I didn't fully take in what it was that Dr. Zobin had done to me. But when I got home and went to have a look at St. Gallen and the drug scene in the park, I opened a heroin wrap and I just cried because my head just stayed calm. The addiction was gone. Before Moscow, I'd have had butterflies in my stomach and that craving would always immediately come back after every withdrawal. So what you actually did after you got back from this therapy, you pretty much placed yourself in the path of temptation. Yeah, obviously. I went right to where it all happens. Because of course I wanted to see whether it's all been wiped away and that ache for the stuff never once came back after the day I got the treatment in Moscow. Right, we've talked a lot about Moscow. Tell us about the whole process of the treatment. What happens to you? One of the conditions was that you stayed clean for a whole 3 weeks before you could even go to Moscow. I was in the clinic for 3 weeks and went through some pretty heavy-duty withdrawal. I only had 21 days, which is why I couldn't do a longer methadone withdrawal. So I pretty much had to go cold turkey. So what? You were locked up in a cell, or what? No. The clinic's got an addiction department, and you get 10 to 15 drug addicts who just spend the day there together and don't actually sleep together. They go through the pain together, and then there are the therapists who are there for you. I was there for 25 days. Before you went there, did you go for a last shot? Is it something like the last cigarette before you stop smoking? I needed a year to make the decision, and during that year there was quite a period of letting go. Whenever I went for withdrawal before that, the last hit was always desperately important. This time it didn't really touch me that much. I knew I'd be going into the clinic for a month and then to Moscow. I was pinning all my hopes on this, and what I hoped for did happen. Okay, so after you did the withdrawal, you went to Moscow to Dr. Zobin. What happened there? What did you all do there? Well, the first day we had a marathon session, which lasted 7 hours, which was all being translated into German and Russian. He explained the whole treatment to me. He analyzed my addiction for me and explained how my brain works, why I keep going back to it. So that went on for 7 hours, and we were completely shattered at the end of it. After that, I was supposed to decide whether I wanted to go for the treatment the next day, yes or no. I was to sleep on it one more night. But if it had been up to me, I'd have lain down there straight away. On the second day, I was taken to the treatment room. They attached the electrodes to me, attached me to the life support systems. And then I had the wildest trip. What? You had another last trip then? And let me tell you, that was the trip of my life. That may sound weird in connection with a drugs therapy, but everybody experiences that. Can you still remember what you experienced? He gave me this shot, and then I was just aware that they were telling me that I would get hot now, but that I wasn't to worry about it. I became as red as a lobster. It got hotter and hotter, and when the heat got to my feet, I left my body, click, and I flew in spheres that I can't even begin to describe. In the film that the Swiss TV made, I was saying something about the 7th and 8th dimension. I was flying unbelievably fast, and with no clothes on, through a beautiful area. But in my subconscious, I was taking in Dr. Zobin's words the whole time. You're really glorifying it. Couldn't someone even become addicted after a trip like that? Not at all if you've done the control test on the 3rd day. A lot of people say you can't send drug addicts on a trip like that. But that's just part of the therapy. And what's more, everyone perceives it as beautiful. If I could have, I'd have stayed up there. It was really a beautiful experience. How long were you gone? 20 minutes. Dr. Zobin checks on his monitors what the actual condition of the receptors is, and can pretty much tell whether the sealing off has worked or not. But the actual test happens on the 3rd day, when you get a shot of a synthetic opiate to see whether everything is sealed. And that is how you find out what would happen if you were to start using again. After the shot, it takes about 3 minutes, and I couldn't breathe anymore, and couldn't move. And all this time I was fully conscious. All of that lasted for 7 minutes with me. Were you given any artificial respiration? Yes, every 30 seconds. I could see the mask from the corner of my eye and thought, please give it to me again. I was able to last for 25 seconds without breathing, but 30 seconds was too long. Yes, and after that test, you quickly forget the pleasant first part. And that is actually the end of the treatment. Yes, that is the confirmation for the doctor that the blocking has been successful. You've told us a lot about receptors and sealing off now. Experts here and in other countries around us have criticized the fact that we don't actually know precisely what it is that Dr. Zobin does with his patients. A lot of people have asked me if I was crazy going to a doctor in Moscow. But what matters to me is the final result. I had so had it up to here with heroin. No one would believe it. I'd have done absolutely anything to get rid of the addiction. Exactly. You were a prisoner of your drug addiction for 23 years. How was it at the end? I mean, first you get high, but is it still like that at the end? No, not at all. I do have to say, though, I did enjoy the early years of my addiction. But the longer it lasts, the longer you end up taking the heroin just so that you can function normally, not to be in withdrawal, and to get through the day and be able to work. But there's nothing beautiful about it anymore. It's just a necessary evil. Understanding this must be a basic condition for going to Moscow. You have to want it yourself. Well, for example, I'd been through 2 long-term therapies, 1.5 years and 2 years, and that didn't help. For the past 10 years, I've been looking around to see what else I could do. What else is there for me? My daughter was born, and I had to take responsibility for her too. I was terrified about going through another conventional withdrawal and destroying everything again that I'd managed to build up in the meantime with the family. For the past 10 years, I'd been in a state heroin program and was working and earning my own money. My greatest fear was that I would destroy all that again. Why didn't you escape from this drug taking with the other therapies? Have you ever tried to explain that to yourself? You can do the physical withdrawal and be clean, but your brain is still addicted and it thinks like an addict. There were times when I'd be clean for a year, 2 years, and I was feeling amazing. But this crazy devil-angel effect, this ongoing battle where the devil says, "Come on, take something," and the angel contradicts and says, "No, that's not good." This permanent resistance is just so exhausting, and all it takes is for something bad to happen, and a second later you're back on it. If you tip over and knock something, that's all it takes. It's such a narrow margin. You've just said that you've been clean for as long as a year or 2 before. Now it's just been 6 months. What are you going to do if the devil comes back? Yeah, well, he's kept out of sight since Moscow. And before that, did he even come in those clean periods? Yes, always. He was permanently there. He was by my side all the time, and now he's gone, and he's not coming back. I'm convinced of that. I do hope so, and hope it works out for you. So let's look at your past history. You were 14 when you came in through the traditional route via alcohol and hash, cocaine by age 15, ending up with heroin at 16. Do you yourself know why it was that you threw yourself at the drugs? The main reason was absolutely obvious to me. My mother became ill with cancer of the womb in 1979, and at Christmas in 1982 she died in our living room under the Christmas tree. Throughout her illness I suffered terribly with my mother. I was a very sensitive child. My mother had an enormous box full of medical drugs, and I saw how she would dose herself up, and I started helping myself from the box. Some of the kids in my circle started drinking and smoking pot, and so did I. And that damned Christmas. I've had an aversion against Christmas trees since then. My mother is lying there in the room in the bed, the Christmas tree at her feet, and she draws her last breath. That's when I flipped, and from that moment on, I just went for anything I could get. What did the drug give you then? Mother love? When my mother died, the whole family fell apart. My father had a serious alcohol problem at the time, which he's got under control today. My sisters went to my grandmother. My brother was taken in by a friend, and I was left behind. The only thing that was left for me was the plane tree courtyard of the children's home. That's where my career started. I was so destructive then, and decided that the more I use and the more I hurt myself, the quicker someone would come along someday and apologize to me. They'd say that a mistake has been made, but no one came. And so it went on. You've worked your way through all the stages that Switzerland had to offer to drug addicts. You've been to all the important places that were available in Switzerland to drug addicts at the time. What was it like then? I was living in Zurich in that early period. The drug scene in St. Gallen was tiny at the time. And as dilapidated as it all was in Zurich, it seemed like heaven on earth to me. You didn't see all the misery there. No, I didn't see the misery and the broken people. I didn't notice the filth. I only clocked the fact that drugs were available by the bucket load, and you could easily get any type of drug you wanted. The first 10 years of my addiction, I was so desperately addicted to the stuff that these places just drew me to them like magic. Nothing about them scared me, like they would a normal person. For example, the people who used to stand on that bridge and look down at us and think to themselves, "That's unbelievable." So how was it for you? It was like you were on show there, like an animal in the zoo. There was that wooden bridge where the people used to stop and look down on the drugs scene, sort of looking at you from a distance, like at the zoo. Did you guys feel good about that? The sort of junkies that needed to hide their addiction, whether it was because their employers or their families, they really did care a lot. But junkies like me, we didn't give a damn what outsiders thought. Everyone I knew what I was doing and where I was doing it. Now you've been drug-free for half a year. What does this freedom mean to you? It's given me incredible power and a real lust for life. Beautiful things hit me in a big way. But then, of course, I also experience the bad things in real time. I just have to start learning how to live again, deal with life and all that's beautiful and bad about it. Doing the therapy in Moscow is the end. But after that, you have to learn about living a normal life. And that's not as easy as all that. I'm still practicing. That'll surely include educating your daughter. Are you sometimes afraid because 5 years from now she's going to be the age you were at when you started? That's a subject that's very much on my mind. I've often spoken at panel discussions with at-risk school children as part of the heroin program to explain the addiction from my point of view. That is going to be something that I will want to continue doing. Above all, I want to speak to the children in my home village of Steinach. So what would you do if you caught your daughter smoking a joint? Ouch, I really hope that doesn't happen. I really hope it doesn't. My ex-wife is a fabulous mother and has brought up the children beautifully to make sure they are on the right track. I just hope that nothing like this happens to these kids. To finish off now, if you could go back to that Christmas of 1982, would you do things completely differently? Ah, well, if I could go back to the beginning, I'd go back to school again at 14. I would wish that I had dealt with all this stuff like my brother did. Yeah, I'd do things differently. Patrick, you can start afresh now. Many, many thanks for this honest talk, which certainly left a deep impression. I would like to wish you all the best for the future.